Hello, my name is Kevin and welcome to the Love Decanters channel. So today I'm going to talk about the UK Glass Excise Tax or no, not exercise, excise is the word I should be using. So this is something that went on for about 100 years and it really bent the UK glass industry out of shape. It did mean that glass was more expensive in the UK as a material and that in general, better quality glass was made in the UK than it was in other countries, and because of the industrial revolution that was going on here, yeah, massive amount of glass was produced in the UK anyway. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I have a timeline because there were changes throughout the period that it was running, and I will bring up the timeline so that you can study it and learn it by heart, and I will talk over that so that as I run through it and show you what actually happened and what I think the impacts of those different changes were as it went through time. So we'll skip over to the timeline now.
And this is the timeline I was talking about. Um, I think it went through in 1846, and it was a tax on glass by weight. I think this was supposed to be initially at the mouth of the furnace. So basically, as something was taken out of the furnace, um, it would be weighed, etc. If you cut the glass that you cut off still had the tax on it. So yeah, regardless of that material not being in the finished product, it was still taxed. Then the next big change happened here in 1780, and tax relief was given. So basically, the tax on glass by weight was taken off in Ireland, and this was to encourage e-commerce in Ireland. Now, it was a real burden, and it wasn't just the tax on the glass itself; it was the administrative overhead because you had to have government people in your factory it, um, weighing that glass and making sure that nobody was double dealing, etc. There had to be locked doors, etc. So it removed a tax on the glass by weight, but also the a administrative burden that went with it, and a controlling burden because you had to have different licenses for different kinds of things that you're making. So when they took took this tax off the glass in Ireland, um, although there wasn't any glass making going, well, not no fine glass making going on in Ireland, lots of people upstick and went to Ireland to set up business making glass. Even though I think they were having to import the materials as well because the overhead on the business was so high that it was actually worth just shipping out and going to Ireland. So the other thing we'll now move on to 1800 when the next change happened. Up until 1800, you actually received some tax relief if some of the glass that was or the materials that was going into the furnace was coloured or basically recycled glass. So yeah, so I think what you tend to find is that prior to 1800, it's very hard to find antique glass. There seems to be like a drop off around that time where um, glass that's older than 1800 is actually hard to come by. And I think part of the reason for that is that effectively people were scraping around looking for glass to throw back into the furnace, and it had value. So a bit like, you know, when we were doing recycling for aluminium tins and people were paying for those, you know, I think that's kind of, at least it's not being done. When I was living in London, it was being done, but it's not being done here where I live. So nobody's going around picking up the aluminium tins off the street, but they were when I was in London because, um, you know, every school kid could pick up all the tins they could find and take them down to the um, recycling place and get money for them. So, yeah, it seems like that's reflected in what we find today as far as antique glass goes, is that this is a bit of a cut-off date where anything older than 1800 um, instantly becomes more scarce. Um, and then in 1811 there was a bit of a concession made, and what they did was, if you it was done to the finished articles, which means that if you cut the glass off, you didn't pay for the tax on the glass that was cut off. You were paying for the weight at the end of the day. Um, so yeah, that I don't know how much of a change that. I think we did see more glass cutting. I, during that time anyway, the time immediate prior to that, a lot of that might have been one of the drivers for this, is a lot of the glass cutting went from being treadle powered to being steam powered, which meant that you could actually cut more glass away. Um, and then the next change was in 1825, when the tax relief for Ireland was removed. Within a few years, um, the number of glassmakers in Ireland plummeted. Yeah, because there was the overhead, so there was some inertia in the business, because obviously people had moved out there, they were living out there, they'd gained expertise, etc., etc. But yeah, it did radically affect the profitability of that business, because they then had to probably import a bunch of bureaucrats to manage the glass as it was done in Ireland. I mean, in the rest of the UK. Then in 1825, they took away the concession that they got in 1811, and yeah, they whacked on more costs, etc. Throughout this whole period, the price went up. I've seen a list of some prices changing, and yeah, it just went up and up. And I don't really know what that meant. I do know that by 1845, when it was actually removed, it was 300% of the value. Okay, so yeah, it made your glass cost 4 times its original uh, making value. So yeah, it was pretty horrendous. Um, and then the tax came off in 1845. So what happened in 1845 is that things went a bit crazy for a while. Obviously, I'm a decanter collector, and we have a whole class of decanters called bludgeon decanters, which are super heavy, and and they were kind of fashionable for about 20 years, I think. Um, and then in the 1860s, things flipped around, and everybody went going really lightweight, because that was because of the aesthetic movement to say glass should be thin and light, and you should see the use of the glass, forget all of this heavy cutting, etc., etc. So yeah, it was a change in fashion, but the initial reaction to suddenly glass was a cheap product. The other thing that was encouraged was pressed glass, because there was hardly any pressed or mold blown glass prior to 1845. It's quite a rare thing in the UK. Um, I know pressed glass didn't start until uh, not that long before in other countries, but mold blown glass was happening quite a lot in other countries, um, and we didn't really see it much in 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 the UK at that time, because the material is expensive. So why would you make cheap things out of an expensive material? So those were the changes that happened. The whole sort of golden age of Irish glass occurred out of this happening from here. Um, and I think the first ones opened in something like 1782 or 83, and and then they managed to keep going for another 25 years after this. So um, I think Penrose Waterford was the last one to close, and that was in 1850. Um, so yeah, so it it brought, fine glass making Ireland into existence for 70 years, and then it stopped for 100 years, and it's only restarted in 1950 again. So yeah, it did change the UK glass making. Um, Even its introduction here, we were having all these heavy balusters, glasses, and all sorts of heavier things. And as soon as this happened, the actual glasses then changed in styles. You had those slim ones with thin bowls, etc., etc. Yeah, a lot of the ones before, the base of the bowl was quite thick, was the fashion, and that disappeared. Um, so yeah, it completely changed the look and feel of English glass, and it's kind of a bit out of step with the rest of Europe and the US. Um, in Europe, there's a lot more mold-blown glass that you're seeing, and pressed glass came in earlier, and in the US as well, pressed glass came in earlier. And even post 1845, I think it took a little while for the pressed glass businesses to ramp up, because you need not machinery, but the equipment, let's say, to make pressed glass. Machinery for pressed glass didn't come until a bit later. But anyway, that's the story of how it runs. So I think we'll wrap up there, because I can just probably blab on about different things for ages.
So that's enough of the timeline. I think it's important for me to do this little explanation, because I've mentioned it a few times in different videos, and it did bend the whole industry out of shape and compared to other countries. As I said, there's a lot more soda glass and cheaply made glass in other countries on the continent. The timelines in those other countries are different. We tend to produce higher quality things, and then other countries tended to copy it, and quite often in a cheaper way, with moulding and pressing, etc., etc. So yeah, things in the UK were out of step with other places because of this tax, and some of my videos where I'm explaining about things make more sense when you know that there's this tax, and why certain things are rare, why some things are heavy, and why they're light, etc., etc. And it just gives you a feel for. And it also did restrict, because of the way the licenses were granted for glass making. It meant that you had a license to make a certain kind of glass, but nothing else. If you wanted to make different kind of glass, you then needed another license, and each of the licenses were quite expensive. So it kind of restricted the glass houses to do specific things as well. And if there was no license for something different, then you couldn't make that thing. So it was a real horrible thing in the end, and that's why it had to go, because it just completely stifled innovation, created a massive bureaucracy that cost quite a high percentage of the value of the glass. So I think with that said, I'll wrap up. I will put some. I think I've got some links for this of descriptions of what happened as well that I've seen on the internet. I'll dig those out and I'll put them in the description below. So with that said, hope you enjoyed this little history lesson. I didn't show you any glass apart from what's behind me. And yeah, so please remember to like and subscribe. I probably won't do another history lesson like this unless I think of something else. But please like and subscribe to watch more videos. Thank you. Good night.